The locomotive wheezed its final breath as it pulled into Dust Hollow Station, black smoke dissipating into the endless Texas sky. Through the grimy window, Sarah McKenna watched the town materialize from the heat shimmer, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the prairie wind like old men sharing secrets. 28 years old and dressed in widow's black, she gripped the handles of her two valises until her knuckles turned white. One held clothes, practical things for a practical life. The other contained letters, dozens of them, never sent, addressed to a man who'd been in the ground for 2 years now. "End of the line, ma'am," the conductor announced, eyeing her traveling attire with a particular brand of curiosity reserved for unaccompanied women. "Someone meeting you?" "No," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "No one's expecting me." His eyebrows climbed higher, but he said nothing more as she gathered her belongings and made her way to the door. The steps down from the train felt like descending into another world, one where she had no history, no sympathetic looks, no well-meaning neighbors trying to introduce her to their bachelor cousins. Dust Hollow sprawled before her in the late afternoon sun, its main street wide enough for wagon teams to turn around. The buildings wore their age, honestly sun-bleached wood, peeling paint, and hand-lettered signs that swayed in the constant wind. Brennan's General Store anchored one corner, while the Broken Wheel Saloon dominated the other. Between them stretched a modest collection of businesses, a barber shop, a small church with a tilting steeple, and what appeared to be a boarding house with lace curtains that had seen better days. Sarah stood on the platform, aware of the eyes upon her. A woman sweeping the steps of the general store paused mid-stroke. 2 old-timers playing checkers outside the barber shop forgot their game entirely. Even the town dog, a mangy creature of indeterminate breed, stopped scratching to stare. She'd expected this. A woman alone, especially one dressed in mourning clothes, was an oddity in any frontier town. But in a place like Dust Hollow, barely a dot on the territorial map, she might as well have been a circus act. The boarding house stood 3 buildings down, its faded sign reading Mrs. Holloway's Rooms, clean beds, hot meals. Sarah adjusted her grip on the valises and started walking, her boots clicking against the wooden sidewalk. Each step felt like a declaration. "I'm here. I'm alone. I'm not looking for your pity or your matchmaking." "Well, I'll be," she heard someone mutter. "Another widow come to town." Another Sarah filed that information away but kept walking. The weight of the letter-filled valise pulled at her shoulder, a familiar ache she'd grown accustomed to. 2 years of words never spoken, feelings never shared, arguments never finished. Thomas had been gone before she'd found the courage to tell him how angry she was, angry at his stubbornness, at the mare that threw him, at God for taking him before they'd had their chance to grow old and cantankerous together. The boarding house door stuck when she tried to open it, requiring a firm shoulder to convince it. Inside, the air smelled of lye soap and yesterday's bread. A narrow staircase led up to the rooms, while a parlor opened to the right, filled with mismatched furniture and fading daguerreotypes of stern-faced strangers. "Help you," the voice came from behind, startling Sarah into nearly dropping her bags. The woman who emerged from the back room could have been anywhere between 40 and 60, with steel-gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it stretched the corners of her eyes. She wore a flour-dusted apron over a brown dress that had been mended enough times to qualify as a quilt. "I need a room," Sarah said. "I can pay a week in advance." Mrs. Holloway, for this could only be the proprietress, studied her with the calculating gaze of someone who'd seen enough boarders to categorize them at a glance. "Widow?" she asked, though the black dress made the question redundant. "Yes." "Passing through." Sarah hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead, had only known she needed to be somewhere Thomas had never been, somewhere his ghost couldn't follow. "No, I'm staying for a while." Mrs. Holloway's expression suggested this answer raised more questions than it answered. "Room's $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper. No gentlemen callers after 8. No liquor in the rooms, no washing hanging from the windows. You want to take in laundry or such. You do it elsewhere. That's fine. You got work. Not yet. Another measuring look. Can you cook clean so? All 3. Then you'll find something. Room 3, top of the stairs. Faces the back so it's quieter. Keys on the hook. Sarah counted out the coins money from selling Thomas's tools. His rifle. Everything that held too much of him to keep. Mrs. Holloway pocketed the payment without counting it. A small gesture of trust that Sarah hadn't expected. Supper's at 6, the older woman added. We eat together in the dining room. Gives the gossips less to chew on if they can see you regular-like. Sarah understood. A widow alone was suspicious. A widow who kept to herself was practically announcing she had secrets to hide. I'll be there. The stairs creaked under her weight. Each step a proclamation to the house's other residents that someone new had arrived. Behind closed doors, she could hear the muffled sounds of lives being lived a cough here, the scratch of a pen there, the rhythmic creak of a rocking chair. Room 3 was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the backs of buildings toward the endless prairie. Sarah set down her valises and sat on the edge of the bed, springs protesting under even her slight weight. From somewhere below came the sound of voices, Mrs. Holloway's and someone else's, male, asking questions about the new boarder. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. Already the town was talking. She opened the valise with the letters, running her fingers across the envelopes. Some were water-stained from tears, others worn soft from handling. She'd written to Thomas every day since he died, telling him about the farm she'd had to sell, the relatives who'd tried to claim his belongings, the nights she'd reached for him and found only cold sheets. But mostly, she'd written about her anger, the kind of anger that good women weren't supposed to feel, certainly not toward their deceased husbands, anger that he'd insisted on breaking that mare himself, anger that he'd left her with debts and decisions and a life half-lived, anger that she'd never get to say any of this to his face, never get to hear him argue back in that infuriating way of his. She'd come to Dust Hollow because it was nowhere a place Thomas had never mentioned, never traveled to, never even heard of as far as she knew. She'd stuck a pin in a map and bought a ticket to the nearest town, desperate to be somewhere his memory hadn't already claimed. Through the thin walls, she heard footsteps in the hallway, followed by whispers. "Widow," someone said, the word carrying the weight of 100 implications. Young one, too. What's she doing here alone? Sarah closed the valise and pushed it under the bed. Let them wonder. She hadn't come to Dust Hollow to find a new husband or to become the object of anyone's pity. She'd come to find out who Sarah McKenna was when she wasn't Thomas McKenna's wife, when she wasn't the woman who'd lost her husband too young, when she wasn't anyone's tragedy or cautionary tale. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Thomas would have called showy. She'd need to unpack, wash the travel dust from her face, prepare for the evening meal and the interrogation it would surely bring. But for now, she stood at the window and watched the town go about its business. A man in worn chaps led a string of horses down the main street. A woman hurried past with a basket of laundry. Children chased each other with the kind of abandon that only came before life taught them to be careful. Dust Hollow wasn't much, might never be much, but it was hers to discover. No shared memories lurked around corners. No one would point to a chair and say, "That's where Thomas always sat." No one would look at her with that particular combination of pity and relief that she'd grown to despise pity for her loss. Relief that it wasn't theirs. She was nobody here, a widow without a history, a woman without expectations. It was terrifying. It was exactly what she needed. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Sarah made her way to the blacksmith shop at the edge of town. She'd heard at breakfast that old Pete sometimes needed help with bookkeeping, and numbers had always come easy to her, easier than the sympathetic looks from the other boarders. At least, The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil guided her to a sprawling structure that seemed part workshop, part stable. Smoke rose from the forge, carrying the sharp scent of hot metal and coal. Through the wide doors, she could see sparks dancing like fireflies in the dim interior. She hesitated at the threshold, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked, a woman in mourning clothes, approaching a world of fire and iron. But she'd come too far to turn back over something as trivial as appearances. "Hello," she called, her voice barely audible over the hammering. The rhythm stopped. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Sarah's prepared speech died in her throat. He was tall enough that he had to duck slightly coming through the doorway, perhaps 35, with shoulders that spoke of years working iron and a face that might have been handsome if it ever smiled. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his clothes, though worn, were clean. But it was his eyes that held her gray as winter sky, steady as stone, looking at her like he could see straight through to the letters hidden under her bed. "Help you?" His voice was low, careful, like he was used to measuring his words the same way he measured horseshoe iron. "I'm looking for Pete, about the bookkeeping position." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or amusement. "Pete's been gone 2 months, sold me the shop, headed California way." He wiped his hands on a leather apron. "Jake Thornfield. I run the smithy now." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course, nothing in Dust Hollow would be as straightforward as she'd hoped. "I apologize for the intrusion. Mr. Thornfield, I was told—" "You're the new widow at Holloway's." It wasn't a question. Sarah straightened her spine, tired already of being defined by what she'd lost. "Sarah McKenna, and yes, I'm staying at the boarding house." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes taking in everything from her travel-worn dress to the determined set of her jaw. Most men looked at her and saw fragility, something broken that needed fixing or protecting. But Jake Thornfield's gaze held something different recognition. Maybe, like looking in a mirror and seeing your own ghosts reflected back. "I don't need bookkeeping," he said finally. "Can manage my own accounts." Sarah nodded, disappointed but not surprised. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "But the stage stop's always looking for help. Cleaning, cooking, mending. Not easy work, but steady." She looked back. He'd moved into the doorway, blocking out the morning light, but somehow not threatening, just present, solid as the mountains she'd passed on the train. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, then surprised her by stepping outside. "I'll walk you. Need to pick up supplies anyway." They fell into step. Sarah acutely aware of how he shortened his stride to match hers. The streets were quieter now, most folks already about their daily business, but curtains twitched as they passed, and Sarah could practically feel the gossip forming like storm clouds. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I can find my own way." "I know." He kept walking, his boots raising small clouds of dust. "But Dust Hollow's got its ways. New widow shows up alone. Folks get ideas. Me walking with you, casual-like, might settle some of them down." Sarah studied his profile, trying to read the reasoning behind the gesture. "And what ideas might those be?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, that you're running from something, or to something, that you've got money hidden away, or no money at all, that you're looking for a husband or running from one. He glanced at her, and she caught that flicker again, darkness behind the steady gray. Folks here got nothing but time to spin stories. "And what story are they spinning about you?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That one's already been told." They'd reached the stage stop, a 2-story building that had seen better decades. Paint peeled from its sides like sunburned skin, and the sign hanging above the door was missing several letters. But the windows were clean, and smoke rose steadily from the chimney signs of life, if not prosperity. Jake stopped at the steps. For a moment, they stood in awkward silence. Two people who'd shared more in 10 minutes than either had probably intended. "Mr. Thornfield," Sarah began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Jake," he said, "and before you go in there, you should know something." He pulled off his work gloves, and Sarah saw his hands clearly for the first time. The left was normal, calloused from work but otherwise unremarkable. But the right, scars covered it from wrist to fingertips. The skin puckered and shiny in places, pulled tight in others. Burn scars. Old but severe enough that she wondered how he managed the fine work of smithing. "Folk'll tell you about these soon enough," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Rather you hear it plain. There was a fire, few years back. I went in after someone. Didn't get there in time." He pulled the gloves back on with practiced efficiency. "Some say it made me heroic. Others say it made me a fool. Either way, it's what they see when they look at me. Figured you should know, seeing as you're trying to avoid being just another story yourself." Sarah met his eyes, understanding passing between them like lightning between clouds. They were both marked by loss, both trying to live in the shadow of what couldn't be changed. "Thank you," she said simply. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that might have been mockery from another man, but felt like acknowledgement from him. "Ma Patterson runs the stop. Tell her I sent you. She's fair, mostly." He turned to go, then paused. "Mrs. McKenna." "Yes." "Dust Hollow ain't gentle. Wind's too hard, sun's too hot, and folks got long memories for short lives." He looked back at her, and for just a moment, she saw something raw in his expression. "You want peace and quiet. You do better elsewhere. But if you're looking for a place that'll let you be what you are, scars and all, well, maybe you're in the right spot after all." "Is that a warning or a welcome?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Both, I reckon. Question is, what are you looking for, gentle?" He gestured toward the endless prairie, peaceful in its emptiness. "Or wildfire?" His hand swept back toward the town, with all its complications and possibilities. The question hung in the air between them like smoke from his forge. Sarah thought of Thomas, of their gentle life that had ended too soon. She thought of the letters under her bed, full of words that burned to be spoken. "I'll let you know when I figure it out," she said. He nodded as if that was answer enough and walked away, his long stride eating up the distance back to his shop. Sarah watched him go, then turned to face the stage-stop door. Through the window, she could see a woman inside Ma Patterson, presumably directing two younger women in what appeared to be a thorough cleaning campaign. The work would be hard, the pay minimal, and the gossip constant. But it was a start, a way to fill her days with something other than grief and letters to a ghost. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Jake Thornfield's question echoed in her mind. Gentle or wildfire, the old Sarah, Thomas's Sarah, would have chosen gentle without hesitation. But that Sarah had died with her husband, buried in Missouri soil alongside his dreams of horse breeding and her hopes for children. This Sarah Dust Hollow's newest widow wasn't sure what she wanted, but as she knocked on the door and watched Ma Patterson's sharp face turn toward the sound, she knew one thing for certain: she was tired of gentle, tired of being careful, appropriate, pitied. Maybe it was time to find out what wildfire felt like. The door opened, and Ma Patterson's assessing gaze took her in from hat to hem. "You the widow from Holloway's?" "Sarah McKenna," she confirmed, chin raised. "Jake Thornfield sent me." Something shifted in the older woman's expression, surprise, maybe, or calculation. "Did he now? That's interesting. Jake doesn't usually involve himself in town business." She stepped aside. "Well, come in then. Let's see what you're made of." As Sarah crossed the threshold, she caught a glimpse of Jake's forge in the distance, smoke rising like a signal fire against the endless Texas sky. Whatever came next, gentle or wildfire, at least she wouldn't be facing it alone. The thought should have worried her. Instead, for the first time in 2 years, she felt something that might have been hope. The women of Dust Hollow watched Sarah like hawks circling wounded prey. She felt their eyes from behind flour sacks at Brennan's store, through the steam of washing day, and most especially during Sunday services at the small Methodist church, where gossip was served as liberally as communion wine. 3 weeks into her employment at the stage stop, Sarah had learned the hierarchy of the town's female society. At the top sat Mrs. Adelaide Brennan, the store owner's wife, whose pearl buttons and store-bought lace marked her as quality. Below her ranked Mrs. Dorothy Hutchins, the minister's wife, armed with Bible verses and backhanded kindness. Then came the others, the banker's wife, the doctor's widow, the school teacher, each guarding their position like fortresses under siege. And at the bottom, the working women, the laundresses, the seamstresses, the stage stop cleaners, the widows without means. Sarah, that's the 3rd time this week he's been by, Martha whispered, peering through the stage stop window. Martha was 19, married to a ranch hand who spent more time with cattle than his wife, and desperate for any drama that wasn't her own life. Sarah didn't look up from the harness she was mending. Who? You know very well who. Jake Thornfield, walking past slow-like, glancing at the door. The smithy's down the street. He has to pass by. Not 3 times before noon. He doesn't. Lucinda, the other girl who helped at the stop, giggled behind her dust rag. He's sweet on you, Mrs. McKenna. Everyone can see it. Sarah's needle slipped, pricking her finger. She pressed the wound to her lips, tasting copper and frustration. Mr. Thornfield has been nothing but professional. Professional, Martha repeated, drawing the word out like taffy. Is that what you call it when a man who hasn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone in 2 years suddenly finds reasons to chat with the new widow? The door chimed, saving Sarah from responding, but her relief evaporated when Mrs. Brennan entered, followed by her usual coterie Mrs. Hutchins and Mrs. Eleanor Pratt, wife of the town's wealthiest man. Ladies. Ma Patterson emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. What brings you by? Christian duty. Mrs. Brennan announced, though her eyes fixed on Sarah like a scientist studying a specimen. We're organizing the church bazaar and thought to ask if any of your girls might contribute. The pause before girls was deliberate, a reminder that they were hired help, not equals. Sarah kept her eyes on her mending, but her hands stilled. What kind of contributions? Ma Patterson asked carefully. Oh, the usual. Preserves, quilts, perhaps some of that cornbread you're known for. Mrs. Hutchins smiled. All teeth and no warmth. Though we understand if some find it difficult to contribute, given their circumstances. Her gaze landed on Sarah's black dress, a look that managed to convey sympathy and superiority in equal measure. I'd be happy to contribute, Sarah said quietly. I make a fair apple butter. The 3 women exchanged glances, the kind of wordless communication that only comes from years of shared judgments. How generous, Mrs. Pratt finally said. Though I wonder, Mrs. McKenna, if you've had time to establish yourself properly, moving to a new town, taking on employment so quickly, one might think you'd want to observe a full mourning period. There it was, the accusation wrapped in concern, the judgment dressed as guidance. A proper widow would have hidden away for at least 6 months, preferably a year, living on savings or family charity. But Sarah had neither savings nor family willing to claim her, and these women knew it. Grief doesn't pay rent, Sarah replied, meeting Mrs. Pratt's eyes directly. And I've found work keeps the mind from dwelling on what can't be changed. Indeed, Mrs. Brennan's tone suggested she found this philosophy suspect. Speaking of work, we couldn't help but notice Mr. Thornfield has taken an interest in your situation. Martha and Lucinda suddenly became very focused on their cleaning, but Sarah could feel them listening. Mr. Thornfield was kind enough to direct me to employment. Nothing more. Of course. Mrs. Hutchins leaned forward conspiratorially. Though you should know, dear, there are stories about that man. That fire. Claimed his wife, Mrs. Pratt finished, voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. Lily was her name. Pretty thing, much like you. They say he went mad trying to save her, burning his hands near off. Some folks wonder if he might have. That's enough gossip in my establishment. Ma Patterson cut in sharply. If you ladies have bizarre business, conduct it. Otherwise, I've got a stop to run. The three women drew back. Affronted, but not defeated. Mrs. Brennan straightened her gloves with deliberate precision. We were only trying to help. A young widow needs guidance, especially one so alone. I appreciate your concern, Sarah forced out, though the words tasted like ash. They left in a rustle of propriety and whispered conversations, but their presence lingered like smoke. Sarah stabbed her needle through the leather with more force than necessary. Vultures, Lucinda muttered once the door closed. Acting all high and mighty when everyone knows Mrs. Pratt's husband spends more time at the broken wheel than home. And Mrs. Hutchins's Christian charity don't extend to the Mexican families on the south side, Martha added. But they'll sure tear down anyone else quick enough. Ma Patterson returned to her ledgers, but not before catching Sarah's eye. They're not wrong about one thing. Girl, Jake Thornfield's got a history that follows him like shadow. You'd do well to be careful. I'm not looking for anything from Mr. Thornfield or anyone else. Maybe not, but that don't mean nothing's looking for you. That evening, Sarah took the long way back to the boarding house, needing air that didn't smell of judgment and old perfume. The sun was setting, painting the buildings in shades of gold and rust. She passed the general store, where Mrs. Brennan would be tallying the day's receipts and planning tomorrow's condescensions. She passed the church, where Mrs. Hutchins would be arranging flowers and sharpening her tongue for Sunday's subtle sermons about proper behavior. At the smithy, she paused. The forge was cold. The big doors closed, but light glowed in the window of the small room Jake used as an office. She could see his silhouette, bent over something at a table. Without thinking, she knocked. The silence stretched long enough that she almost turned away. Then footsteps, and the door opened. Mrs. McKenna. He seemed genuinely surprised. Something wrong? No, She felt foolish now, standing at his door as evening fell. Exactly the kind of behavior the town gossips would feast on. I wanted to thank you for the recommendation to Ma Patterson. The work's been good. He studied her face, and she wondered what he saw. The exhaustion she couldn't quite hide, the anger she couldn't quite swallow, the loneliness she couldn't quite admit. You're welcome. He stepped aside. Would you like to come in? I've got coffee on. She should have said no, should have maintained the careful distance that protected them both from speculation. Instead, she found herself in his small office, accepting a tin cup of coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. The room was sparse but clean. A desk covered in papers orders, receipts, sketches of ironwork, a single chair, a narrow cot in the corner, and on the wall, a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a shy smile. Lily, Jake said, following her gaze. My wife. Sarah looked away, feeling like an intruder. She was beautiful. She was. He took the other chair, leaving proper distance between them. Good, too, better than this place deserved. His scarred hand wrapped around his cup. The ladies tell you about her. They mentioned the fire. A bitter smile touched his lips. I'll bet they did. Tell you how I failed, how I was too late, how some folks think I might have. He stopped, jaw clenching. People say a lot of things, Sarah said quietly. Doesn't make them true. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt that same recognition from their first meeting. Two people marked by loss, swimming against the current of a town that preferred its tragedies neat and its widows silent. Your husband, he said. How long? 2 years. Gets easier. Sarah thought of the letters under her bed, of the anger that still woke her some nights. Different, not easier. They drank their coffee in companionable silence, the kind that didn't need filling with empty words. Outside, night was falling properly, and Sarah knew she should go, but something held her there, maybe the peace of being with someone who didn't expect her to perform grief the way the town demanded. They'll talk, Jake finally said. You being here. They already talk. It'll be worse. They've decided what I am. They'll paint you with the same brush if you're not careful. Sarah set down her cup and stood. Mr. Thornfield, Jake. I spent 2 years being what everyone expected. The grieving widow, the brave survivor, the woman who needed saving or fixing or matchmaking. She moved to the door, then turned back. I'm tired of being careful, tired of being gentle. If they want to talk, let them. At least it'll be about something I chose, not something that happened to me. She left before he could respond, walking back to the boarding house through streets gone dark, behind curtains. She could see families gathering for evening meals, lives moving forward in ordinary ways. Tomorrow, the gossip would be thick as morning fog. The widow McKenna visiting Jake Thornfield after dark, scandal enough to keep the church ladies busy for weeks. But tonight, Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, feeling something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Like herself, the storm came without warning on a Tuesday evening, turning the sky green as old copper before unleashing sheets of rain that hammered the roof like accusations. Sarah had stayed late at the stage stop, finishing repairs on a trunk when the first lightning split the sky. You'd better wait it out, Ma Patterson said, peering through the window at the deluge. No sense drowning between here and Holloway's. But after an hour, the storm showed no signs of breaking. If anything, it intensified. Wind rattling the windows in their frames. Ma Patterson had retired to her rooms upstairs, leaving Sarah alone with a dying lantern and the sound of her own thoughts, never good company during storms. Thunder had always reminded her of Thomas's accident, that sudden crack when the horse threw him, the terrible silence after. She was reaching for her shawl, determined to make a run for it. When the door burst open, Jake Thornfield stood in the doorway, water streaming from his hat and coat, looking like he'd walked through hell to get there. Saw the light, he said, breathing hard. Figured you might be stuck. I can manage. Even as she said it, another crack of thunder shook the building, and she flinched. His expression softened. Come on, I'll walk you back. You'll drown us both. Maybe. He shrugged out of his coat and held it out to her. But at least we'll drown honest. The coat was still warm from his body, smelling of leather and smoke and something indefinably him. Sarah pulled it around her shoulders, trying not to think about how intimate the gesture felt. They stepped into the storm together, and the world disappeared. Rain came sideways, stealing breath and sight. Jake's hand found her elbow, steady and sure, guiding her through the darkness. Lightning illuminated the street in snapshot moments, the church steeple, the scattered boxes outside Brennan's store, the sign of the broken wheel swinging wildly on its chains. By the time they reached the boarding house, they were both soaked through despite the coat. Sarah fumbled with the door, finally managing to push inside. The hallway was dark, everyone sensibly already in bed. You'll catch your death going back in this, she whispered. Jake hesitated, water pooling around his boots. I've survived worse. Another crack of thunder, close enough to feel in her bones. Sarah made a decision that would have horrified the proper widow she'd been trying to be. There's a fire in the kitchen. You can dry off some before heading back. She led him through the dark hallway, both of them trying to move quietly despite squelching boots. The kitchen was warm, embers still glowing in the stove. Sarah added wood, coaxing the fire back to life while Jake stood dripping by the door, clearly unsure of the propriety of being in a boarding house kitchen after midnight. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a chair near the stove. "You're making a lake on Mrs. Holloway's clean floor." He sat, pulling off his boots with efficient movements. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time without his usual layers, the worn shirt clinging to broad shoulders, the way his dark hair curled when wet, the scars on his hands more visible without gloves. Sarah busied herself making coffee, needing something to do with her hands. The domestic normality of it, two people drying by a fire, made her chest tight with memories she'd rather forget. "You don't like storms," Jake observed. She kept her back to him. "Thomas died during one, not the storm's fault, but," she shrugged. "The mind makes connections." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry." The words came out sharper than intended. "Sorry for my loss. Sorry for my circumstances. Sorry I'm too young to be widowed. Too poor to be respectable. Too stubborn to remarry quick." She turned to face him. "Are you sorry, Jake, for whatever put those scars on your hands?" He was quiet long enough that she thought she'd overstepped. Then he slowly pulled off his right glove, extending his hand toward the firelight. The scars were worse than she'd realized, covering not just his hand but disappearing up under his sleeve. "The fire started in the barn," he said quietly. "Hay stored too wet, heated up inside, happens sometimes. I was in town when I saw the smoke." His jaw tightened. "Lily was trying to save the horses, always too soft-hearted about animals. By the time I got there, the whole structure was coming down." Sarah poured coffee, her hands steady despite the tightness in her throat. She set a cup near him but didn't speak. "I got her out." His scarred fingers traced the rim of the cup. "Carried her clear, thought I'd done it. But the smoke—" He stopped, swallowed. "Doctor said her lungs were already gone. She lasted 3 days, long enough to tell me she was sorry. Sorry." A bitter laugh. "She was dying, and she was sorry for trying to save horses." "You blame yourself." "Wouldn't you?" He looked up at her, eyes reflecting the firelight. "If I'd been there, if I'd stored the hay different, if I'd gotten there faster, if I'd died instead." He flexed his scarred hand. "This is nothing. Reminds me every day what I couldn't do." Sarah sat across from him, close enough to see the pain etched in lines around his eyes. "I blame Thomas for dying. Still do, sometimes. Stupid man had to prove he could break that mare himself, had to show he was still young enough, strong enough." She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "Then I blame myself for letting him, for not fighting harder, for being angry at a dead man." "You're allowed to be angry." "Am I?" She met his gaze. "The good widow is supposed to cherish memories, honor the departed, maybe shed pretty tears at appropriate moments. She's not supposed to rage at night, to burn letters she can't send, to wish she could resurrect him just to yell at him proper." Jake leaned forward, his scarred hand moving across the table toward hers, stopping just short of touching. "Who decided what a good widow looks like?" "Same people who decided what a good widower looks like, I expect." That earned her an almost smile. "Then we're both failing spectacular." The storm was passing, thunder growing distant, rain softening from assault to patter. They should move, should restore proper distance, should pretend this midnight conversation never happened. Instead, they sat in the dying firelight. Two people who'd learned that sometimes love wasn't enough to save someone, that sometimes it was the thing that destroyed you. "The town talks about us," Sarah said eventually. "The damaged Smith and the bitter widow, Mrs. Brennan thinks you're dangerous. Mrs. Hutchins thinks I'm shameless. What do you think?" Sarah studied him, this man who'd walked through a storm to make sure she got home safe, who carried his guilt in scars and silence, who looked at her like she was something more than her tragedy. "I think you see me, not the widow, not the worker. Not the woman who needs saving or fixing, just me. Sarah. Her name on his lips was like a promise. You asked if I was sorry. I'm sorry Lily died. Sorry I couldn't save her. But I'm not sorry for trying. And I'm not sorry for this sitting here with you, talking honest. His scarred fingers finally bridged the gap, covering her hand with careful pressure. What about you sorry? The warmth of his touch sent something through her that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with being alive. Ask me again in daylight, when the whole town's watching. I will. It wasn't a threat or a promise. Just truth laid bare as his scars. Sarah turned her hand palm up, letting their fingers intertwine his rough with work and damage, hers stained with leather polish and lye soap. Outside, the rain had gentled to a whisper, and somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 3. You should go, she whispered, before someone sees. Should, but he didn't move, and neither did she. They sat like that, hands clasped across the narrow table, until the fire died to embers and the first gray light of dawn crept through the window. Only then did Jake pull away, standing stiffly from the chair. Sarah. He paused at the door, silhouetted against the growing light. That question from before about gentle or wildfire, I think you already know the answer. He left before she could respond, disappearing into the pre-dawn quiet. Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, her hand still warm from his touch, and thought about fire, how it destroyed. Yes, but also how it cleared ground for new growth, how it hurt to touch but was necessary for life. Through the window, she could see smoke beginning to rise from the smithy's chimney. Jake, starting his day like nothing had changed, but something had shifted in those storm-dark hours, something that couldn't be taken back. The town would talk, Mrs. Brennan would clutch her pearls, Mrs. Hutchins would sermonize about propriety. But Sarah found she didn't care. She'd spent 2 years being gentle, being proper, being what everyone expected. Maybe it was time to burn. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a boy in pressed clothes who waited expectantly for a response. Sarah read it twice, her fingers tightening on the expensive paper. Asterisk, Mr. William Pratt requests the pleasure of Mrs. Sarah McKenna's company for dinner this Saturday evening at 7 o'clock. Tell Mr. Pratt I'll send my response shortly, she managed, pressing a penny into the boy's palm. Ma Patterson looked up from her ledgers as Sarah returned to the main room. You've gone pale as wash day. Bad news. Sarah handed her the invitation. Ma Patterson whistled low. William Pratt himself. Well, our little widow's moving up in the world. I don't want to go. Course you don't. But refusing William Pratt? Ma Patterson shook her head. That's a dangerous game in a town this small. Sarah knew she was right. William Pratt owned the lumber mill, the largest ranch within 50 miles, and held notes on half the businesses in town. He was Dust Hollow's closest approximation to royalty, a man in his 40s with silver at his temples and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His wife had died 5 years back, and since then, he'd courted widow after widow, each relationship ending when the woman mysteriously decided to leave town. I could say I'm ill, Sarah suggested, and he'd send his personal physician. Lucinda had joined them, drawn by the whisper of gossip. Remember when Mrs. Garcia tried that he showed up at her door with a doctor and half the church ladies to witness his Christian concern? Martha nodded eagerly. She left for San Antonio the next week, said she had family there, but everyone knew. Knew what? Sarah demanded. The three women exchanged glances. Finally, Ma Patterson spoke. William Pratt doesn't like being told no, never has. He's got a vision for this town. See, and part of that vision is having the right kind of woman by his side. Refined, respectable, grateful. Someone who's seen enough hardship to appreciate his generosity, Martha added. But still young enough to... She stopped, blushing. To give him the sons his first wife couldn't. Ma Patterson finished bluntly. You fit the bill perfect. Sarah, young widow, educated enough to speak proper, working class, so you'd be appropriately thankful. He's probably been planning this since you stepped off that train. Sarah's stomach turned. She'd fled one life where others made her choices only to land in another. I'll refuse, politely but firmly. You do that, Ma Patterson said slowly. And you'd best be prepared for the consequences. Suddenly, the stage stop might not need so many hands. Your room at Holloway's might become unavailable. Little pressures, nothing you could prove, but enough to make life mighty uncomfortable. The unfairness of it burned in Sarah's chest. But before she could respond, the door chimed. Jake Thornfield entered, bringing with him the scent of coal smoke and hot metal. He took in the scene, Sarah's pale face, the other women's worried expressions, the invitation still in Ma Patterson's hand, and his jaw tightened. Ladies, he said, touching his hat brim. His eyes found Sarah's. Mrs. McKenna, I've got that order ready for pickup whenever you're free. Sarah frowned. What order? The one we discussed, for the... He paused meaningfully. Special project. Understanding dawned. He was offering her an escape, a reason to leave. Oh yes, of course. I'll come now if that suits. Perfect timing. She grabbed her shawl, ignoring the knowing looks from the other women. Outside. Jake's expression was grim. Pratt. How did you know? Saw his boy heading this way earlier. When you looked like you'd seen a ghost? Wasn't hard to figure. They walked slowly, giving the appearance of business rather than refuge. You going? I don't see how I can refuse without consequences. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, there might be another way. What do you mean? Pratt's practical above all else. He wants a wife who'll elevate his standing, run his household, give him heirs. But he also values his reputation. Can't have people thinking he's pursuing a woman who's already spoken for. Sarah's step slowed. Are you suggesting... I'm suggesting that if folks thought you and I had an understanding, Pratt might redirect his attentions elsewhere. Man like that doesn't compete for women, he acquires them. The implications hung between them like morning mist. A false courtship to deflect a real threat. It was practical, sensible even. So why did her heart race at the thought? People already talk about us, she said carefully. Let them talk louder. Jake stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I'm not proposing anything improper, just visible interest. Walk together after church. Let me call it the boarding house proper-like. Give Pratt a reason to look elsewhere without direct insult. And when he does look elsewhere, what then? Something flickered in Jake's eyes. Then you decide what you want. No obligations. Sarah studied his face. This man who'd shown her more genuine kindness in weeks than she'd received in years. What do you get from this arrangement? A bitter smile touched his lips. Peace, maybe. The matchmakers have been after me since the mourning period ended. A widow and a widower. Both damaged goods might as well damage each other. Right? The smile faded. But also, I like talking to you, Sarah. Like having someone who doesn't expect me to be fixed or grateful or forever guilty. If this gives us reason to continue that without the whole town making it more than it is, well, all right, she heard herself say. But we need terms, boundaries. Name them. No false promises, no talk of feelings we don't mean. And when it's done clean. No obligations on either side. Agreed. He held out his hand, his scarred one, and she shook it, sealing a bargain that felt more dangerous than any storm. That evening, Sarah penned her response to William Pratt on Mrs. Holloway's best stationery. Asterisk, Mr. Pratt, I am deeply honored by your invitation. However, I must respectfully decline as I have a prior commitment that evening. With regards, Mrs. S. McKenna asterisk. She gave it to the boarding house boy to deliver, then sat at her window watching the sunset over Dust Hollow. In the distance, she could see the Pratt mansion on its hill, windows glowing like eyes. Closer, the smithy's chimney released its steady stream of smoke. Saturday arrived with unnatural warmth for autumn. Sarah dressed carefully for the morning market, her best black dress, the one with intact buttons and minimal mending. If she was to play the part of a woman being courted, she might as well look it. Jake appeared at the boarding house at precisely 9, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt she'd never seen before. Mrs. Holloway answered the door, eyes sharp with curiosity. "Morning, Mrs. Holloway. I'm here to escort Mrs. McKenna to market, if she's willing." The older woman's gaze ping-ponged between them. "Is she now well? That's interesting." But she called up the stairs. "Mrs. McKenna, you have a caller." Sarah descended slowly, aware of the other boarders peering from doorways. Jake offered his arm with formal courtesy, and she took it, the solid warmth of him steadying her nerves. They walked through town like actors on a stage, gathering stares and whispers with each step. At the market, Sarah selected vegetables while Jake carried her basket, their conversation carefully ordinary but their proximity speaking volumes. "Pratt's here," Jake murmured as they paused at the egg vendor. "Northwest corner, trying not to look obvious." Sarah glanced casually in that direction. William Pratt stood near the leather goods, his silver-headed cane tapping against his palm as he watched them. Even from a distance, she could see the calculation in his expression. "He doesn't look pleased," she observed. "Good." Jake's hand brushed hers as he paid for the eggs, the touch brief but visible. "Let him stew." They continued through the market, Jake playing the attentive suitor with surprising skill. He asked her opinion on purchases, carried her parcels without being asked, and twice made her laugh genuine laughter that drew even more attention. It was as they prepared to leave that Pratt approached, moving with the confidence of a man who expected the world to rearrange itself for his convenience. "Mrs. McKenna," he said smoothly, ignoring Jake entirely. "I trust you received my invitation." "I did, Mr. Pratt, and I responded. I hope you received my note." "Indeed." His smile was razor thin. "Though I confess disappointment, I'd hoped to discuss opportunities with you. The lumber trade offers many positions for a woman of capability. The threat was subtle but clear play along, or find yourself without employment." Jake shifted slightly, his presence a warm wall at her back. "That's kind of you," Sarah replied evenly, "but I'm content with my current position." "Contentment is for those without ambition, Mrs. McKenna. I'd have thought a woman of your circumstances would appreciate the chance for advancement." "The lady said she's content," Jake interjected quietly. Pratt's gaze finally acknowledged him, cold as winter creek water. "Mr. Thornfield, I wasn't aware you had business here." "Just helping Mrs. McKenna with her marketing." Jake's tone was mild, but his stance had shifted subtly, shoulders squaring. "Neighborly thing to do." "Neighborly," Pratt repeated. "Yes, you've always been neighborly with widows, haven't you?" The insult hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt Jake tense beside her, but before he could respond, she stepped forward. "Mr. Pratt, I appreciate your interest in my welfare. Truly, but I'm afraid I must decline any offers at present. I'm sure you understand." She smiled sweetly. A woman in mourning must be careful of appearances, after all. Pratt's eyes narrowed. He looked between them, seeming to calculate odds and advantages. Finally, he touched his hat brim with mocking courtesy. "Of course, though mourning does eventually end. Mrs. McKenna, as does neighborliness." He walked away, his cane clicking against the ground like a countdown. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That went well," Jake said dryly. "Did it? He seems the type to hold grudges." "Maybe," but he's also practical. There are other widows in town, ones who might be more appreciative of his attention. They started back toward the boarding house, but the easy playfulness of earlier was gone, replaced by awareness of what they'd begun. This wasn't just deflecting unwanted attention anymore. They'd challenged the most powerful man in Dust Hollow, publicly chosen each other over his influence.
"Thank you,"
Sarah said as they reached her door.
"For this,
She gestured helplessly. For being neighborly. That almost smile appeared again. "Anytime, Sarah, anytime." He left her at the door with perfect propriety, but Sarah felt the weight of watching eyes from every window. By evening, the entire town would know that Jake Thornfield was courting the widow McKenna, and that William Pratt had been politely but firmly rejected. She climbed the stairs to her room, thinking about consequences and choices, about gentle lives and wildfires, in standing up to Pratt, in accepting Jake's proposal of false courtship. She'd chosen the flame over comfort. The question now was whether either of them would survive the burning. The winter market was in full swing, with farmers from outlying areas bringing preserved goods, canned vegetables, and handicrafts to trade before the serious cold set in. Sarah moved through the crowds, ostensibly examining jars of apple butter, but her attention kept drifting to the commotion near the livestock pens. William Pratt held court there, his voice carrying over the general din as he discussed the purchase of draft horses with several ranchers. He'd been persistent since that first rejection, never direct enough to cause scandal, but his presence felt constant as shadow. Small incidents accumulated: her favorite items at Brennan's store suddenly out of stock, whispers following her through church, the best produce at market somehow always claimed before she arrived. "Mrs. McKenna." She turned to find Pratt himself approaching, his timing too convenient to be coincidence. He wore his prosperity like armor gold watch chain, polished boots, coat that had never known hard labor. "Mr. Pratt." She kept her tone neutral, her hands steady on her basket. "Enjoying the market? I always find winter preparations invigorating." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his tobacco and pomade. "Planning ahead, securing resources, ensuring survival through the harsh months. A man in my position understands the importance of protection. I manage well enough. Thank you." "Do you?" His smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Dust Hollow can be unforgiving to those without proper support. Jobs disappear, rooms become unavailable. Why? Just last week, poor Mrs. Garcia found herself in quite the predicament when the hotel suddenly needed her room for renovations. Sarah's jaw tightened. Mrs. Garcia, another widow who'd refused his advances, had indeed left town abruptly. How unfortunate for her. Indeed, though I hear I might have a position opening at my household. Good wages, comfortable quarters, security. He leaned in, voice dropping. A smart woman would consider her options carefully. And a gentleman would respect a lady's declared attachments. His laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Attachments to Thornfield. "My dear, that's merely desperation masquerading as affection. How long do you think he'll maintain interest once the novelty wears off, once he remembers what happens to women who get too close to him?" Sarah's temper flared. "That's enough." But Pratt wasn't finished. He reached out, his fingers closing around her wrist with practiced authority. "I'm offering you something real. Mrs. McKenna. A position in society. Comfort, protection. Not some damaged blacksmith's guilty conscience. I believe the lady asked you to stop." Jake's voice cut through the market noise like a blade. He stood behind Pratt, still in his work clothes, soot streaking his shirt. His expression was calm, but Sarah recognized the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his stance. Pratt's grip on her wrist tightened fractionally before releasing, "Mr. Thornfield, we were just discussing employment opportunities." "Were you?" Jake moved past him to Sarah's side. his presence solid as a wall. Seemed more like harassment to me. The market around them had gone quiet, shoppers and vendors alike sensing drama. Pratt straightened his coat with elaborate casualness, but Sarah caught the flush creeping up his neck. "I don't believe this concerns you, Thornfield." "The lady's welfare concerns me plenty." Jake's scarred hand rested lightly on Sarah's elbow, the touch gentle but possessive. "And right now, she looks like she'd prefer your absence to your opportunities." Pratt's mask finally slipped, revealing the ugliness beneath. "You think you can protect her? You couldn't even protect your own wife. What makes you think this one will fare any better?" The words hit like physical blows. Sarah felt Jake go rigid beside her, saw his free hand curl into a fist. Around them, the crowd held its collective breath. "Jake," she said his name quietly, a warning and a plea. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Jake took a deliberate step back, though his hand remained on her elbow. "You're right, Pratt, I couldn't save Lily, but at least I tried to save her, not own her." The insult landed perfectly. Pratt's face darkened to an unhealthy shade. "You'll regret this, both of you. I've been patient, generous even, but my tolerance has limits." "As does mine." Jake's voice carried the kind of quiet threat that meant more than shouting. "Touch her again just once and we'll find out just how limited your tolerance really is." They faced each other in the crowded market, two men measuring consequences and resolve. Finally, Pratt stepped back, his smile returning but empty of warmth. 6 months, he said conversationally. "That's how long your kind of arrangement typically lasts. When it falls apart, and it will remember that my offer came first." His gaze found Sarah. "Pride makes a cold bedfellow, Mrs. McKenna, and winter's coming." He walked away, the crowd parting before him like water. Gradually, the market noise resumed, though Sarah caught plenty of glances and whispers directed their way. "We should go," Jake said quietly. She nodded, abandoning her half-filled basket. They walked in silence until they reached the quiet stretch between the market and town proper. Only then did Jake speak. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Don't—" Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him. "Don't apologize for defending me. I nearly hit him." "But you didn't." She studied his face, seeing the struggle there between old guilt and new anger. "Though I admit, part of me wishes you had." That surprised a laugh from him, short and rough. "Bloodthirsty creature." "Maybe," she resumed walking, and he fell into step beside her. "He won't let this go." "No. He'll make things difficult." "Probably." "Jake," she struggled to find the right words. "What he said about Lily was true." His voice was flat. "I couldn't protect her, failed her when she needed me most, but that doesn't mean I'll stand by and watch him corner you like prey." They'd reached the boarding house. Sarah turned on the step, looking up at him. The afternoon sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair, highlighted the weathered lines around his eyes. Not a young man, not unmarked by life, but steady in a way that mattered. "I'm not Lily," she said softly. "I'm not looking to be saved." "I know." His scarred hand reached up, fingers barely brushing a strand of hair that had escaped her bonnet. "Maybe that's why I—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "This arrangement of ours, it's getting complicated." "It was always complicated." "No, I mean—" He pulled his hand back, shoving it in his pocket. "People are starting to believe it. Hell, sometimes I forget it's just for show." The words hung between them, dangerous as loaded guns. Sarah's heart beat hard against her ribs. "Jake, I know. No false promises. No feelings we don't mean." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry. Sarah, I'm not fool enough to think you could actually want someone like me. Just be careful around Pratt. He's not the kind of man who accepts losing. He left before she could respond, long strides carrying him back toward the smithy. Sarah stood on the boarding house steps, watching him go, her wrist still feeling the ghost of Pratt's grip and her elbow warm from Jake's touch. Inside, Mrs. Holloway waited in the parlor, her expression knowing. Saw the show at the market. Half the town's talking already. Let them talk. Girl, you're playing with fire. Two kinds of it, if I'm not mistaken. Sarah met her gaze steadily. Good thing I've already been burned. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, she thought about Jake's words. Sometimes I forget it's just for show. The terrible truth was, so did she. What had started as mutual protection was becoming something else. Something that had nothing to do with deflecting William Pratt and everything to do with the way her pulse jumped when Jake smiled. She thought about Pratt's threats, about the power he wielded in this small town. She thought about Jake's scars, his guilt, his careful distance. She thought about her own heart, supposedly buried with Thomas but somehow beating faster each day. Winter was coming. Pratt had said he meant it as a threat, a promise of cold consequences. But Sarah had survived winters before, had survived loss and gossip and the weight of others' expectations. If Pratt wanted a fight, she'd give him one. And if Jake, well, that was a different kind of burning altogether, one that might consume them both before spring came again. Through her window, she could see smoke rising from the smithy chimney, evidence that Jake too was awake, wrestling with his own ghosts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Pratt's retaliation, the town's judgment, the increasingly blurred lines of their arrangement. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself one moment of honesty. She was no longer playing at being courted by Jake Thornfield. Somewhere between that first offer of help and today's public confrontation, performance had become truth, and that, more than any threat from William Pratt, might be the most dangerous development of all. The blizzard struck without mercy 3 days before Christmas, turning Dust Hollow into a white wasteland within hours. Sarah had stayed late at the stage stop, helping Ma Patterson prepare for the holiday rush of travelers. When the first winds began to howl, "Lord have mercy," Ma Patterson muttered, peering through the frosted window. "Haven't seen it come down like this since '71. You'd best stay put, girl. No sense trying to make it back to Holloway's in this." But Sarah was already reaching for her coat. "It's only a few streets. I'll be fine. Few streets might as well be few miles in a whiteout." Ma Patterson's weathered face creased with worry. "Temperature's dropping fast. You get turned around out there." "I know the way." Sarah wrapped her scarf tight, though privately she admitted concern. The wind was screaming now, rattling the windows in their frames. Through the glass, she could barely see the building next door. She made it halfway before realizing her mistake. The world had disappeared into a swirling white void, landmarks erased, even sound distorted by the wind. Snow drove into her face like needles, stealing breath and sight. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. Her hands were already numb despite her gloves. Panic clawed at her throat. She'd heard stories of people freezing to death mere yards from shelter, lost in storms like this. Thomas had always laughed at her city-bred fears of weather. But Thomas wasn't here now, and she was going to die alone in the snow because she'd been too proud to wait out a blizzard. A shape loomed out of the white, a building, though she couldn't tell which one. She felt her way along its wall, praying for a door, an overhang, anything. Her skirts were heavy with snow, dragging at her steps. The cold had moved past pain into a dangerous numbness. Then hands, strong hands catching her shoulders, pulling her against a solid chest. She couldn't see the face, but she knew those hands, that presence. "Jake!" His name came out as barely a whisper. "Hold on to me!" His voice was rough with cold or fear or both. "Don't let go!" He wrapped his coat around both of them, shielding her from the worst of the wind, and began moving with sure steps through the blind white world. Sarah buried her face against his chest, trusting him completely, her frozen fingers clutching his shirt. Time lost meaning in the storm. Could have been minutes or hours before he shouldered open a door, half dragging her into blessed warmth. She blinked, vision clearing slowly, and recognized the small room behind the smithy, his living quarters. "You little fool," Jake muttered, working at the frozen knots of her scarf with shaking hands. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking I wanted my own bed." Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely get the words out. "Nearly got your own grave instead." He peeled away her soaked coat, then her gloves, hissing at the sight of her blue-white fingers. "These need warming, slow and careful, or we'll lose them." He led her to the stove, settling her in the single chair and taking her hands between his. His own were warm. He must have come straight from the forge when the storm hit. Gently, so gently. He began rubbing life back into her frozen fingers. "How did you find me?" she asked, mesmerized by the careful way he worked, the concentration on his face. "Saw you leave Patterson's earlier. When the storm hit hard, I knew you'd try to make it back." He glanced up, and she saw real fear in his eyes. "Sarah, when I couldn't see you in the street, I'm all right." "You're not." His hands tightened fractionally on hers. "Another few minutes out there." He stopped, jaw clenching. "Can you feel this?" Pins and needles shot through her fingers as feeling returned. She nodded, biting back a whimper. "Good. That's good. Means no permanent damage." But he didn't release her hands, just kept rubbing gentle circles with his thumbs. "Your feet next. Boots need to come off." Any other time, the impropriety would have mattered. But Sarah was too cold and grateful to care about propriety as Jake knelt before her, working at the frozen laces of her boots. Her stockings were soaked through, her feet as white as her fingers had been. "This is becoming a habit," she said, trying for lightness. "You rescuing me from storms." "Rather not make it one." He cradled one foot between his hands, warming it as carefully as he had her fingers. "You scared me, Sarah, proper scared, when I couldn't find you at first." "You came looking for me in this." He looked up at her, snow still melting in his dark hair. "Of course I did." The simple certainty in those words undid something in her chest. "Jake." "No." He focused on her feet, switching to the other one. "Don't say whatever you're thinking. Not now. Not when I can still see you disappearing into that white hell." They sat in silence while he worked, the storm raging outside but unable to touch them here. The room was sparse but clean, a bed in one corner, a small table, a trunk, and on the wall, still, that photograph of Lily. When feeling had returned to all her extremities, Jake finally sat back on his heels. "You'll need dry clothes. Can't send you back out in those." Sarah looked down at her soaked dress, heavy with melted snow. "I can't wear your things through town. The scandal." "No one's going anywhere in this," as if to emphasize his point. The wind hit the building hard enough to rattle the walls. "Storm like this will last hours, maybe all night." The implications settled over them like snow. She was trapped here, in Jake's private rooms, until the blizzard passed. By morning, everyone would know where she'd spent the night. Her reputation, already precarious, would be thoroughly ruined. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "I've made things worse for you." "Worse than dead," Sarah managed a weak laugh. "I'll take ruined over frozen, thank you." He found her a shirt and trousers, comically large but dry, and turned his back while she changed. The domestic intimacy of it, wearing his clothes, warming by his fire, made her chest tight with longing for something she couldn't name. "Tea," he offered, busying himself at the small stove. "Nothing fancy, but hot." "Please." They sat at his small table, 2 cups between them, while the storm raged its fury outside. In the lamplight, Sarah could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. "You don't have to marry me, you know," he said suddenly. "After this, I know what people will say, what they'll expect, but you don't owe me that. Sarah stared at him. Is that what you think, that I'd feel obligated? Won't you? He met her gaze. Respectable widow spends the night with the town's damaged goods. Only one way to salvage that reputation. My reputation was my choice to risk when I walked into that storm. You couldn't have known. I mean, before that. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing courage. When I agreed to our arrangement, when I let you court me, false or not, when I started looking forward to seeing you, started feeling more alive in your company than I'd felt in years. Jake went very still. Sarah, you asked me once, gentle or wildfire. I know my answer now. She reached across the table, covering his scarred hand with hers. I'm tired of gentle. Jake, tired of safe. I want to burn. He turned his hand palm up, fingers interlacing with hers. You know what happened to the last woman who got close to me. She died in a barn fire. Not because of you, not because you failed, because sometimes terrible things happen and love isn't enough to stop them. Sarah tightened her grip. I'm not Lily. You're not who you were then, and this whatever this is between us isn't that. What is it then? Sarah considered the question, this man across from her with his careful hands and guarded heart. Outside, the storm howled its fury, but here in this small circle of warmth and light, she felt safer than she had in years. It's two people who've been broken choosing to build something new. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Jake stood, pulling her up with him, their joined hands drawing her close. The whole town will talk. Pratt will make our lives miserable. You could do better than a scarred blacksmith with more guilt than sense. And you could do better than a bitter widow who writes letters to dead men and picks fights with the richest man in town. She reached up with her free hand, touching his face. But here we are. Here we are. He agreed, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it was heat and need, and 2 years of frozen grief melting all at once. His arms came around her, solid and sure, and she pressed closer, feeling alive and present in a way she'd forgotten was possible. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said simply. Not because of the storm, not because of what people will think. Stay because I want you here. Sarah thought of all the reasons she should say no. The scandal, the gossip, the proper period of mourning she hadn't observed, the fury of William Pratt when he learned of this. Then she thought of how Jake's hands had rubbed life back into her frozen fingers, how he'd walked into a killing storm to find her, how he looked at her like she was worth burning for. Ask me again, she said, that question about what I want. His eyes searched hers. You want gentle or wildfire? Sarah McKenna, widow, looked up at Jake Thornfield, widower, and chose the flames. Wildfire, she whispered, and pulled him back down to her. Outside, the blizzard raged on, burying Dust Hollow in white, but inside a small room behind the smithy, 2 people who'd been frozen in grief chose instead to burn, and the warmth they made between them was enough to last through any storm. The morning after the blizzard dawned crystal clear and bitter cold, the sun reflecting off snow like shattered diamonds. Sarah woke in Jake's arms, wearing his shirt, feeling safer than she had since Thomas died. For a moment, she let herself simply exist in this warmth, this quiet peace. Then reality crashed in with the sound of voices outside. Jake was already awake, his body tense. Search party, he murmured. Looking for you, most likely. Sarah sat up, immediately missing his warmth. Through the small window, she could see several men trudging through the snowdrifts, Mayor Henderson at their head. Her stomach dropped. They'll find me here. Yes, Jake's voice was calm, but she could see the worry in his eyes. Question is, what do you want to do about it? Before she could answer, a heavy fist pounded on the door. Thornfield, you in there? Jake rose, pulling on his trousers and shirt with unhurried movements. He squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently. "Whatever happens, we face it together." He opened the door to find not just the mayor, but half a dozen men, including Reverend Hutchins and, unsurprisingly, William Pratt. Their faces registered shock, scandal, and in Pratt's case, vicious satisfaction as they spotted Sarah.
Mrs. McKenna,
The mayor's voice was carefully neutral.
your landlady was worried when you didn't return last night.
The storm came up suddenly, Sarah said, lifting her chin. Mr. Thornfield was kind enough to provide shelter. Shelter. Pratt's smile was sharp as a blade. Is that what we're calling it? Watch your tone, Jake warned, stepping partially in front of Sarah. Gentlemen. Reverend Hutchins intervened. Though his expression was troubled, perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more appropriate. Nothing to discuss, Jake said flatly.
Mrs. McKenna was caught in the blizzard. I found her near frozen and brought her here. Would you rather I'd left her to die for propriety's sake?
Of course not, the mayor said quickly. However,
you must understand how this appears.
I understand plenty. Jake's scarred hand found Sarah's, holding it in full view of the men.
I also understand that Mrs. McKenna and I have been courting openly for weeks now. Nothing improper about a man protecting his intended.
The word intended rippled through the group like a stone in still water. Sarah felt her heart skip but kept her face calm.
Intended?
Pratt's voice dripped skepticism.
How convenient. And when did this engagement occur last night? Perhaps after the compromise?
Before, Sarah said clearly.
Though I fail to see how our private affairs concern you, Mr. Pratt.
Your private affairs become public concern when they threaten the moral fabric of our community, Reverend Hutchins said gravely. An unmarried woman spending the night with an unmarried man. A woman who would have died without shelter. Jake interrupted. Tell me, Reverend, which sin is greater, preserving life or preserving reputation? The minister flushed. There are ways, proper channels. She could have stayed at the church.
In a blizzard where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face,
Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it.
I couldn't even find the boarding house, much less the church.
Nevertheless, the mayor said uncomfortably, the situation is delicate. Perhaps if you were to make your engagement official, with a wedding date set. Today, Jake said simply.
Everyone stared.
Sarah's hand tightened in his, but she understood. Delay would only give their enemies more ammunition. I'm sorry, the mayor blinked. We'll marry today, this afternoon, if Reverend Hutchins is willing. Jake looked down at Sarah, a question in his eyes. She nodded. Decision made in the space of a heartbeat.
Impossible,
Pratt burst out.
There are procedures, announcements to be made.
Nothing improper about a quick wedding when there's already been a courtship, the mayor mused, clearly seeing a way to avoid scandal. Folks might talk, but married is married. Reverend Hutchins shifted uncomfortably.
I suppose, given the circumstances, if both parties are willing.
We are, Sarah said firmly.
Pratt's face had gone an alarming shade of purple. This is ridiculous. You can't simply...
Actually, they can. Mayor Henderson interrupted, apparently having decided which way the wind was blowing. Unless you have some legal objection to voice, Mr. Pratt. The threat in the mayor's tone was subtle, but clear. Push too hard, and Pratt might find his own dealings examined too closely. The businessman's jaw worked furiously, but he managed to control himself. No legal objection, he ground out. Though I wonder if the bride knows what she's binding herself to. The Thornfield name carries quite a history.
As does the Pratt name,
Sarah replied sweetly, though perhaps different kinds of history. Several of the men coughed to hide smiles. Pratt's reputation for aggressive business practices and questionable land deals was well known. even if rarely spoken of openly. 3 o'clock then, Reverend Hutchins said, clearly eager to end this confrontation. At the church, I'll need witnesses. I'll stand for Jake, the mayor volunteered, surprising everyone. Known him since he came to town. Good man.
And I'm sure Mrs. Holloway will stand for me.
Sarah added. The group began to disperse, though Pratt lingered. When the others were out of earshot, he stepped closer, voice low and venomous. You think you've won marrying him won't protect you from what's coming. I've broken stronger people than either of you. Maybe, Jake said quietly. But you've never dealt with two people who've already lost everything. We've got nothing left to threaten, Pratt. Nothing you can take that grief hasn't already claimed. We'll see about that. Pratt's smile was cold as winter wind. Accidents happen. Fires start. People get careless. Jake moved so fast Sarah barely saw it, his hand shooting out to grab Pratt's coat, hauling the man close. You threatening my wife, Pratt. Not your wife yet, Pratt wheezed. Close enough. Jake's voice was deadly quiet. And if anything happens to her or what's mine, I won't come for your money or your business. I'll come for you. He released Pratt with a small shove. The businessman straightened his coat, trying to recover his dignity, but Sarah saw the flash of fear in his eyes. 3 o'clock, Pratt said finally.
Wouldn't miss it for the world.
He trudged away through the snow, leaving them alone. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jake. I know. He turned to her, cupping her face in his scarred hands. This isn't how either of us planned it. Marriage born of scandal and spite instead of whatever we might have built given time. Do you regret it? No. The word came quick and certain. Do you? Sarah thought of the warmth she'd felt waking in his arms, the safety of his presence in the storm, the way he'd faced down Pratt without hesitation. No regrets, but Jake, he's dangerous. What he said about fires. Let me worry about Pratt. He kissed her forehead gently. You just focus on becoming Mrs. Thornfield by 3 o'clock, unless, is it too soon you're mourning? Thomas has been gone 2 years, Sarah said softly. I've written him hundreds of letters he'll never read. Cried tears that changed nothing. I think he'd understand that I'm tired of living with ghosts. And Lily would box my ears for letting you freeze to preserve some notion of propriety, Jake added with a rueful smile. She was practical that way. They stood in the doorway, two people about to bind their lives together out of necessity and scandal and something deeper neither was quite ready to name. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow-covered town into something almost magical. I should go, Sarah said reluctantly. Face Mrs. Holloway. Find something appropriate to wear. Sarah. Jake caught her hand as she turned. I want you to know this may have started as convenience, but I mean to be a good husband to you. Real husband. If you'll have me. And I mean to be a real wife, she replied. No more arrangements or pretense. Just us. Just us, he agreed, and kissed her properly. There in the doorway where anyone could see. Let them see, Sarah thought. Let the whole town witness that sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances. That two people broken by loss could choose to build something new from the pieces.
3 o'clock couldn't come soon enough?
The walk back to the boarding house felt like a parade, with curtains twitching and faces appearing in windows as she passed. Sarah kept her head high. Jake's too large coat wrapped around her like armor. She'd made her choice in that small room behind the smithy, not just to survive the storm, but to truly live again. Now she had 3 hours to prepare to marry a man she'd known for months, but truly seen only in glimpses through small kindnesses, shared silences, and the fierce protectiveness he'd shown today. 3 hours to close one chapter of her life and begin another. As she climbed the boarding house steps, she could see Mrs. Holloway waiting in the doorway, arms crossed but a slight smile playing at her lips. "Well," the older woman said, "I hear congratulations are in order. News travels fast. Faster than wildfire in a town this size." "Mrs." Holloway stepped aside to let her in. "Come on then, future Mrs. Thornfield. Let's see if we can make you presentable. Can't have you getting married looking like you spent the night in a blacksmith shop, even if you did." Despite everything, the threats, the gossip, the uncertain future, Sarah found herself smiling. In 3 hours, she'd promise herself to a scarred blacksmith who'd walked through a blizzard to save her. She could hardly wait. The smell hit them, first acrid smoke carrying on the wind like a harbinger of disaster. Jake had been working late in the smithy, Sarah bringing him supper as had become their habit in the 3 months since their hasty wedding, when they heard the bells. Fire bells, the sound that struck terror into every frontier town's heart. "Where?" Sarah gasped, but Jake was already moving, grabbing his leather apron and gloves. Through the door, they could see the orange glow against the night sky. The direction made Sarah's blood run cold. That's coming from our side of town," she breathed. Jake's face had gone grim. "Stay here." "Like hell." She was already reaching for the water buckets they kept filled by the door, a precaution every building in Dust Hollow maintained. They ran toward the glow, joining the stream of townspeople racing with buckets, blankets, anything that might help. But as they rounded the corner, Jake stopped so suddenly that Sarah nearly crashed into him. The smithy was ablaze. Not just on fire, consumed. Flames shot through the roof, devouring the wooden frame sections like a starving beast. The heat hit them from 50 feet away. A wall of destruction that sent neighboring buildings' occupants scrambling to wet down their roofs. "No!" The word tore from Jake's throat, raw and disbelieving. "No. I banked the forge. I checked everything twice. This isn't—" "Jake," Mayor Henderson appeared through the smoke, face streaked with soot. "Thank God you're here. We've got a bucket line going, but—" "It's too far gone," Jake said flatly, staring at his life's work burning. "Save the neighboring buildings. Let it burn." "But your tools, your—" "Let it burn," Jake repeated, louder, his scarred hands clenched at his sides. "Just keep it from spreading." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Jake, look at me." He turned, and she saw it in his eyes, not just loss, but recognition. They both knew this was no accident. The forge had been cold for hours, every precaution taken. This was deliberate. This was Pratt making good on his threats. "Get the books," Jake said suddenly. "The ledgers, the contracts. They're in the metal box under the floorboards in the back room. If the fire hasn't reached—" He was already moving, but Sarah held tight. "You're not going in there." "Those papers are all I have left of the business. Sarah, without them—" "Without them, you're still alive?" Her voice cracked. "I won't lose you to fire. Not you too." For a moment, they stood frozen, the past and present colliding as flames danced where Jake had rebuilt his life after losing Lily. Then another voice cut through the chaos. "Let me—" They turned to find Tom Martinez, one of the ranch hands from the outlying farms, already wrapping a wet blanket around himself. "Back room, metal box under the floor." Jake nodded mutely. Before anyone could stop him, Tom plunged into the smoke. The next minute stretched like hours. Sarah could feel Jake vibrating beside her, every muscle taut with the need to follow, to act, to save something. She kept her hand locked on his arm, anchoring him to her. Then Tom emerged, coughing but triumphant. The metal box clutched to his chest. Hands reached to help him clear of the building as a section of roof collapsed behind him, sending sparks showering into the night sky. "Everybody back!" Fire Chief Morrison bellowed. "She's coming down!" They retreated to safe distance as the smithy gave its death rattle beams cracking, walls folding inward. Years of Jake's careful work reduced to ember and ash. Sarah felt Jake shudder beside her and pressed closer, offering what comfort she could. Thornfield. They turned to find William Pratt approaching, dressed in an evening coat as if he'd been pulled from some social engagement. His expression was a masterwork of false concern. "What a terrible tragedy," Pratt said smoothly. "After all your careful work rebuilding, one can't be too careful with fire, can one? It has such a history of taking what you love." Jake moved faster than thought, his fist connecting with Pratt's jaw with a sound like breaking kindling. Pratt went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "Jake, no!" Sarah grabbed his arm as he advanced on the fallen man. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, torn between stopping the fight and letting it happen. "You burned it," Jake growled, standing over Pratt. "Just like you threatened." Pratt dabbed at his nose with a handkerchief, his smile never wavering despite the blood. "Careful, Thornfield. Accusations like that require proof. I've been at the Hendersons' dinner party all evening. Plenty of witnesses." "Convenient." "Isn't it?" Pratt got to his feet, helped by none of the surrounding townspeople. "Though I must say, perhaps this is a blessing. Now you can leave town, start fresh somewhere. Safer, both of you." "We're not going anywhere," Sarah said clearly, stepping forward. "This is our home." "Is it a smithy can be rebuilt? I suppose, though credit might be hard to come by. And customers, well, people have to wonder about a man who can't keep his own shop from burning. Bad luck does seem to follow some folks." "That's enough." Mayor Henderson stepped between them, his usual political neutrality cracking. "Mr. Pratt, I think you should go." "Of course. Wouldn't want to intrude on private grief." Pratt straightened his coat. "Do let me know if I can help in any way. I might have work at the mill. Manual labor, of course, but honest work for honest folk." He walked away, leaving silence in his wake. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, the bucket brigade turning their efforts to ensuring the fire didn't spread. Jake stood staring at the ruins of his life's work, fists still clenched. "Jake," Sarah touched his face gently, turning him to look at her. "We'll rebuild." "With what?" His voice was hollow. "Everything I had was in there. Tools passed down from my mentor. The anvil I bought with the last of Lily's life insurance. 5 years of building something from nothing, and he destroyed it in an hour." "Not everything," Sarah said firmly. "Tom saved your books. Your reputation is intact. Everyone knows this wasn't your fault. And you have something now you didn't have before." "What's that?" "Me." She took his soot-stained hands in hers. "I've got money saved. Not much, but enough for basic tools. And I'm tired of being gentle. Remember, if Pratt wants a fight, he'll get one." "Sarah, you can't stand by my husband, can't fight for our life here." She felt anger rising, clean and powerful. "I spent 2 years being a proper widow. Jake, keeping quiet, keeping my head down, accepting what was given. But I chose wildfire when I chose you, and I meant it." Something shifted in Jake's expression, grief giving way to determination. He won't stop. This was just the beginning. "Then we'd better be ready." Sarah looked around at the townspeople still working to contain the damage. "And we're not alone. Look." Tom Martinez was organizing a salvage crew, seeing what could be saved from the ruins. Mrs. Holloway appeared with blankets and coffee. Even some of the church ladies who'd gossiped most viciously about their marriage were helping, their faces grim with shared outrage. "Pratt made a mistake," Sarah said quietly. "He thought burning the smithy would break you, drive us out, but he forgot something important." "What's that?" "Fire doesn't just destroy, it also forges." She squeezed his hands. "We've both been through the flames before. Jake, we survived. We'll survive this too." The smithy collapsed fully then, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky like fallen stars. Jake watched it burn, but when he looked back at Sarah, she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before.
Not just determination, but hope. "All right," he said simply. "We rebuild. We fight. Together." "Together," she agreed. They stood there as the fire burned itself out. Two people who'd already lost everything, once refusing to be broken again. Around them, the town rallied, the attempted destruction bringing unexpected unity. Pratt had meant to isolate them, but instead had revealed how many quiet allies they had. It would be a long road back, tools to replace, trust to rebuild, Pratt's next move to anticipate. But as Sarah felt Jake's hand strong in hers, she knew they'd walk it together. The widow and the widower had chosen wildfire over gentle lives. Now they'd prove they could survive the burning. As dawn broke over Dust Hollow, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the smoking ruins of the smithy stood as testament to what had been lost. But in the faces of those who'd fought the flames, who'd saved what could be saved, who'd stood witness to Pratt's cruelty, Sarah saw something more powerful than any fire. The spark of resistance, the flame of community, the wildfire of two hearts that refused to be consumed. Let Pratt think he'd won this round. He'd learned soon enough that some things, once forged in fire, could never truly be destroyed. A week after the fire, Sarah stood in the small Methodist church wearing the only good dress that hadn't smelled of smoke, a deep blue that misses. Holloway had altered from her own wardrobe. It wasn't the wedding dress she'd imagined in girlhood dreams, nor the hasty black she'd worn for her first marriage to Jake. This was something different, a woman choosing her path with eyes wide open. The church was packed, not just with well-wishers, though there were those too, but with witnesses. The whole town had come to see Jake and Sarah Thornfield renew their vows, a declaration that no fire, no threat, no powerful man could break what they'd built together. Jake waited at the altar, wearing a borrowed suit that pulled tight across his blacksmith's shoulders. His scarred hands were bare, visible to all, as Sarah had requested. No hiding today, no shame, just truth, standing tall in the morning light. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Hutchins began, his voice carrying to every corner. "We gather today not for a wedding, for these two are already wed, but for a reaffirmation. A declaration that what God has joined, no man shall tear asunder." Sarah barely heard the familiar words. Her attention was fixed on Jake's face. On the way, his gray eyes held hers steady and sure. 3 months ago, they'd married in haste and scandal. Today, they chose each other with intention. "Sarah," Jake said when prompted, his voice clear and strong. 3 months back, I promised to be your husband. Today, I promise to be your partner. In rebuilding, in fighting, in whatever comes next." His scarred fingers tightened on hers. "You asked me once what I wanted, gentle or wildfire. I choose wildfire. I choose you. Today and every day after." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't try to hide them. "Jake, you walked through a blizzard to save me. You stood against the most powerful man in town for me. You've shown me that surviving isn't the same as living." She took a breath, aware of William Pratt sitting in the back row, his presence a dark shadow over the proceedings. "I choose courage over comfort. I choose love over fear. I choose wildfire. I choose you." "The rings?" Reverend Hutchins asked. Tom Martinez stepped forward with 2 simple bands, not gold, but iron, forged from salvaged metal from the destroyed smithy. Jake had made them with borrowed tools in the evening hours. His first work since the fire. They were rough, imperfect, but strong. "With this ring," Jake said, sliding the band onto Sarah's finger, "I pledge not just my love, but my trust. You're not Lily, trying to save what couldn't be saved. You're Sarah, teaching me that some things are worth burning for." "With this ring," Sarah echoed, placing the matching band on his scarred finger. "I pledge not just my faith, but my fire. You're not Thomas, leaving me before we had our chance. You're Jake, showing me that building something new from ashes is the bravest thing of all." "Then, by the power vested in me," Reverend Hutchins said, his voice rising with unusual emotion,
I pronounce you again and always husband and wife. What God has joined, let no man put asunder." The last words rang with particular emphasis, and Sarah saw several people glance toward Pratt. The businessman sat rigid, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Jake kissed her then, not the gentle touch of their first ceremony, but something deeper, acclaiming. A promise, a declaration of war against anyone who'd try to tear them apart. The church erupted in applause, but Sarah barely heard it over the pounding of her heart. As they turned to face the congregation, Sarah caught sight of something that made her breath catch. The church was full not just of townspeople, but of others Mexican families from the south side that the church ladies usually ignored. Ranch hands who rarely came to town. Even some of the saloon girls standing in the back, all here to witness, to support, to stand against Pratt's tyranny. They walked down the aisle together, past friends and enemies alike. As they neared Pratt's pew, he stood, blocking their path. "Touching ceremony," he said, voice carrying despite the sudden hush. "Though I wonder how long iron rings will last. Such a brittle metal when exposed to pressure." "Mr. Pratt," Mayor Henderson warned. But Jake raised a hand. "Iron's stronger than you think," Jake said calmly. "Especially when it's been through fire, tends to come out harder than before." "We shall see." Pratt's smile was winter cold. "Enjoy your day, Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield. Such happiness is fleeting." He swept out, leaving a chill in his wake. But Sarah felt Jake's hand warm in hers, saw the faces of their unexpected allies, and lifted her chin. "Let him threaten," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "We've already survived the worst he can do." But she was wrong. The reception was held in the church hall, a modest affair with donated food and Tom Martinez's fiddle providing music. Sarah was laughing at something Mrs. Holloway said when she smelled it again, smoke. But different this time. Sweet smoke, paper smoke. "Fire!" someone screamed. "The boarding house!" They ran, the whole wedding party racing through the streets. But this time, they were too late. The boarding house was engulfed, flames already breaking through the upper windows. "Mrs. Holloway let out a cry of despair. "My papers," Sarah gasped. "The letters." She'd kept them, those letters to Thomas, in a box under her bed. The last pieces of her old life, her grief, her anger. Now they burned along with everything else she owned. "Everyone's out," someone reported. "No one hurt, but the building—" Gone, like the smithy, like their new start, like any hope that Pratt would stop his campaign of destruction. "Enough." Sarah turned at Jake's quiet word. His face had changed, the celebration of moments ago replaced by something harder, more determined. "Jake, get everyone to safety," he told Mayor Henderson. "Then meet me at the church, all of you. It's time Dust Hollow decided what kind of town it wants to be." An hour later, the church was full again, but the mood was different, angry, frightened, determined. Jake stood at the front, Sarah beside him, both still in their wedding clothes now streaked with soot. "2 fires in a week," Jake said without preamble. "Both targeting those who've stood against William Pratt. We all know it's no coincidence." "You can't prove that," Deputy Morrison called out, though he looked uncomfortable. "I don't need to prove it. We all know the truth." Jake's scarred hands gripped the podium. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" "What can we do?" someone asked. "He owns half the town." "He owns buildings." Sarah stepped forward. "He doesn't own us, not unless we let him." "Easy for you to say." "Mrs." Brennan sniffed. "Some of us have businesses to protect, families to feed." "And how long before he comes for those?" Jake challenged. "How long before everyone who's ever said no to William Pratt finds their life in ashes?" Silence stretched until Tom Martinez stood. "The Thornfields are right,"
We've let Pratt run this town through fear too long. I say we stand together."
"And do what?" Deputy Morrison demanded.
"Rebuild," Sarah said simply. "The boarding house, the smithy, everything he burns. We rebuild, together. Show him he can't break our community with fire." "And if he tries again?"
Jake smiled then, sharp as his wife's. "Then we'll be ready. Night watches, bucket brigades, whatever it takes." He looked directly at Deputy Morrison. "And maybe it's time for some real law in this town, the kind that doesn't look away when rich men commit crimes." One by one, people began to stand. Tom Martinez, Mrs. Holloway, even some of the church ladies who'd gossiped most viciously. Not everyone, some slipped out, unwilling to risk Pratt's wrath, but more stayed than left. "All right then," Mayor Henderson said finally. "We rebuild, together. And Mr. Pratt will learn that Dust Hollow takes care of its own." The meeting broke up with plans already forming work crews, material donations, guard schedules. As people filed out, Sarah caught Jake's arm. "You know this isn't over. Pratt won't stop now."
"I know." He pulled her close, there in the empty church. "But neither will we. We chose wildfire. Remember time to show this town what that really means." Sarah thought of her letters. Now ash in the ruins of the boarding house. All those words to Thomas. All that old grief, gone. And in its place, something new. Not gentle, not easy, but fierce and alive and worth fighting for. "No more looking back," she said softly. "No more letters to the dead, just us, building something from the ashes. Just us." Jake agreed, and kissed her as the morning sun broke through the church windows, painting them both in gold. Outside, Dust Hollow was already stirring, hammers ringing, voices calling, a community choosing to stand rather than kneel, and at the heart of it, a blacksmith and his bride, iron rings on their fingers and fire in their hearts, ready for whatever came next. The widow and widower had become something more, partners, fighters, the spark that lit a wildfire of resistance. Let Pratt try to burn them out. They'd already survived the flames. Now it was time to forge something unbreakable from the ashes. Sarah smiled, fierce and free. "Ready." Jake's answering smile matched hers. "For wildfire always." They walked out together into their new life, where gentle was a luxury they couldn't afford, but love real, tested. Unbreakable love was the only weapon they needed. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Sarah and Jake's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love forged in fire, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more listeners discover this story of courage, determination, and choosing wildfire over gentle comfort in the American frontier.